Take a close look at this photograph. It's a faded sepia-toned image, captured sometime in 1907, depicting what appears to be a perfectly ordinary family. The kind of picture you might stumble upon in an old attic trunk, evoking a gentle sense of nostalgia for a bygone era. A father, stern but proud, stands tall, his hand resting on the shoulder of his elegantly dressed wife. She, in turn, gazes softly at the camera, a faint, almost imperceptible smile playing on her lips. Between them, a young girl, perhaps 6 or 7 years old, sits on a plush velvet chair, her posture stiff, her gaze fixed and unwavering, a common trait in the long exposure photographs of the early 20th century. This is the Vance family, a snapshot of their lives, frozen in time, seemingly innocent, utterly unremarkable. But appearances, as we often learn, can be deceiving, and in this particular photograph, the true nature of the deception lies not in the somber expressions or the formal attire, but in the small porcelain object clutched tightly in the child's hands. Let's zoom in on that child, Eleanor Vance. Her name, like so many from that period, evokes a sense of quiet grace. Her dress is meticulously tailored, her hair neatly styled, framing a face that, even through the grainy filter of over a century, carries a certain delicate beauty. Yet, there's something about her eyes, a vacant intensity that seems to pierce through the lens, hinting at a depth beyond her tender years. It's the kind of stare that, even when common in old photography, can make the modern viewer feel a prickle of unease. But it's not Eleanor herself that holds the deepest secret. It's her companion. In her lap, Eleanor cradles a doll. It's a porcelain doll, exquisitely crafted, no doubt expensive, a prized possession for any little girl of the era. Its delicate features, painted with meticulous detail, suggest a doll of considerable artistry. The small, rosebud mouth, the rosy cheeks, the intricate curls of its hair, all speak of a toy designed to bring joy. But look closer. Even in the faded tones, there's something unsettling about this doll. Its eyes, wide and unblinking, seem to possess an almost human-like intensity, a gaze that feels less like that of a cherished plaything and more like a watchful observer. The faint smile, intended to be sweet, instead verges on the uncanny, a fixed, knowing expression that seems to mock the very innocence it's meant to portray. The caption beneath the photo, if there ever was one, would likely have simply read, "The Vance Family, 1907." A simple identifier for a simple memory. But what if I told you that this seemingly innocuous family portrait, this relic of a bygone age, holds a secret so dark, so profoundly disturbing, that it haunted this family for generations? What if that innocent-looking doll, clutched so tightly in young Eleanor's hands, was not merely a child's toy, but something far more sinister? This photograph, on its surface, is a testament to a family's pride and affection. But beneath that veneer of normalcy lies a chilling narrative, one woven with threads of obsession, fear, and a malevolent presence that refused to be contained. The doll, Rosamond as she was known, wasn't just a beloved plaything. She was a vessel, a silent witness, and perhaps an orchestrator of events that would unravel the Vance family's very existence. The story begins in the sprawling, elegant Victorian mansion that the Vance family called home in Providence, Rhode Island. Arthur Vance, the patriarch, was a man of considerable influence and wealth, his fortune built upon the success of his textile mills. He was a figure of respect in the community, known for his shrewd business acumen and his philanthropic endeavors. His wife, Clara, was the epitome of a society lady, graceful and charming, a hostess whose soirees were the talk of the town. They were, by all accounts, a picture of success and prosperity. But beneath the polished surface of their lives lay a quiet longing. Eleanor was their only child, born after many years of trying, a precious gift that completed their family in a way nothing else could. She was cherished, doted upon, the apple of her parents' eye. Yet even in her earliest years, Eleanor was a quiet child, somewhat frail, possessing a delicate constitution that often worried her parents. She preferred solitude to boisterous play, and her imagination, though vivid, often seemed to draw her inward, away from the bustling world around her. The year Eleanor turned 5, a special gift arrived, one that would irrevocably alter the course of her life, and indeed, the fate of the entire Vance household. It was a doll, an exquisite creation commissioned by Arthur himself from a renowned doll maker in New York. This was no ordinary toy. It was a bespoke piece crafted from the finest porcelain, with hand-painted features and real human hair. Eleanor named her Rosamond. From the moment Rosamond was presented, Eleanor became utterly, completely obsessed. It was an immediate, intense bond that bordered on the unnerving. Rosamond was no longer just a doll. She was Eleanor's constant companion, her confidant, her inseparable shadow. Eleanor talked to Rosamond incessantly, whispering secrets and stories into her porcelain ear. She insisted that Rosamond sleep in her bed, nestled beside her, and rarely, if ever, allowed the doll out of her sight. If separated, even for a moment, Eleanor would become distressed, crying inconsolably until Rosamond was returned to her embrace. Initially, Arthur and Clara found Eleanor's attachment endearing. It was sweet, they thought, a sign of her tender nature and developing imagination. But as the days turned into weeks and the weeks into months, their gentle amusement began to curdle into concern. Eleanor's devotion to Rosamond was escalating, becoming increasingly extreme. She seemed to prefer the doll's silent company over that of other children, or even her own parents. Playdates became a struggle as Eleanor would cling to Rosamond, ignoring her peers. Attempts to gently separate her from the doll, even for a short while, were met with severe tantrums, a ferocity of emotion that was uncharacteristic of their usually quiet daughter. Then, faint, unsettling occurrences began to ripple through the grand Victorian house. Small objects would inexplicably move from their places, only to reappear later in peculiar locations. Faint whispers, like the rustling of dry leaves, were sometimes heard emanating from Eleanor's room when she was ostensibly alone with Rosamond. The family's beloved pets, usually eager to greet Eleanor, began to avoid her room, often cowering at the doorway, their fur bristling, their eyes wide with an unidentifiable fear. Arthur, ever the rationalist, dismissed these incidents as the quirks of an old house, the creaks and groans of settling timbers, or perhaps Eleanor's overactive imagination playing tricks on the household staff. Clara, though more sensitive to the subtle shifts in atmosphere, tried to reassure herself with similar explanations. They told themselves it was nothing, just a phase, a child's intense attachment to a cherished toy. But deep down, a seed of unease had been planted, a tiny, cold prickle of dread that would only grow with time, nurtured by the silent, unblinking gaze of Rosamond. As Eleanor grew older, her bond with Rosamond deepened, evolving from mere attachment into an almost symbiotic relationship that began to define her very existence. The quiet, somewhat frail child her parents had known receded further into the background, replaced by a girl increasingly withdrawn from the vibrant world outside her nursery walls. Her preference for Rosamond's silent company over human interaction became more pronounced, a source of growing concern for Arthur and Clara. They observed with dismay how Eleanor would sit for hours, meticulously arranging Rosamond's hair, dressing her in miniature outfits, all while engaged in hushed, one-sided conversations that seemed to stretch into eternity. Her parents worried about her social development, about her ability to form connections beyond the porcelain gaze of her doll. More disturbingly, Eleanor began to repeat phrases and express ideas that seemed far too mature, even dark, for a child her tender age. These pronouncements often carried an unsettling wisdom, or a cynical edge that felt utterly alien to the innocence expected of childhood. The source, Eleanor would always calmly explain, was Rosamond. "Rosamond says Mrs. Henderson is a liar," she might declare, her young voice devoid of childish malice, almost as if relaying a simple, undeniable truth. Or, "Rosamond doesn't like that man," referring to a visiting relative or a tradesman, a statement that would often be followed by an inexplicable mishap befalling the individual. It was as if Rosamond was not just a confidant, but a silent, omniscient oracle, whispering secrets and judgments into Eleanor's impressionable mind. Then, the small, unsettling occurrences that had once been dismissed as quirks of an old house began to escalate, transforming into a series of unfortunate events that could no longer be so easily explained away. It started subtly, almost imperceptibly, with a string of minor misfortunes befalling those who, for whatever reason, had incurred Eleanor's, or rather Rosamond's, displeasure. There was Mr. O'Malley, the Vance family's kind and jovial gardener. One sunny afternoon, while tending to the rose bushes near Eleanor's play area, he had accidentally dropped a pruning shear, which, in its fall, chipped one of Rosamond's tiny porcelain fingers. Eleanor had screamed, a high-pitched, almost inhuman sound, clutching Rosamond protectively. Mr. O'Malley, profusely apologetic, had tried to mend the doll. But the damage was done. A few days later, while repairing a loose shutter on the second story of the mansion, Mr. O'Malley suffered a debilitating fall from his ladder. He landed awkwardly, his leg twisting beneath him, resulting in a compound fracture that crippled him for life. From her nursery window, Eleanor, clutching the now mended Rosamond, was seen watching the chaos below with an unnervingly calm, almost detached expression, her eyes fixed on the gardener's writhing form. The family attributed it to a tragic accident, a terrible stroke of bad luck. But Clara, Eleanor's mother, felt a chill that had nothing to do with the autumn air. This incident, however, was merely the first in a growing pattern. Clara, ever more attuned to the subtle shifts in her daughter's demeanor and the increasingly frequent accidents around the house, began to develop a deep, gnawing dread about Rosamond. It was a feeling that started as a prickle of unease and slowly blossomed into a full-blown conviction that the doll, far from being an innocent toy, was somehow malevolent. She would try, subtly at first, to separate Eleanor from Rosamond. She might suggest putting Rosamond away in a toy chest for a while, or gently try to substitute another, equally beautiful doll in her place. But every attempt was met with Eleanor's fierce resistance and an almost supernatural persistence from Rosamond herself. Clara would hide the doll in a locked cabinet, only to find it back in Eleanor's bed the next morning, or inexplicably perched on Eleanor's shoulder during breakfast, as if it had never been moved. The locks remained undisturbed, the windows secured. It defied all logical explanation. Clara's growing unease soon morphed into outright fear. She found herself glancing nervously at Rosamond, feeling the doll's unblinking gaze following her as she moved through the house. She sometimes caught herself whispering prayers, hoping to ward off whatever dark presence she felt emanating from the porcelain figure. She tried to voice her concerns to Arthur, to articulate the chilling sense of wrongness that permeated their home. But her husband, a man of logic and reason, summarily dismissed her fears. Arthur Vance, immersed in the world of commerce and tangible realities, saw his wife's anxieties as nothing more than a nervous woman's overactive imagination. He regarded Rosamond as a harmless, if somewhat overly cherished, child's toy. He believed Clara was being overly dramatic, perhaps even succumbing to the pressures of raising a child who was, admittedly, a little peculiar. He attributed the strange occurrences to the natural wear and tear of an old house, to simple bad luck, or to the clumsiness of household staff. "It's just an old house, Clara," he would say, waving a dismissive hand. "And children have vivid imaginations. You're letting your nerves get the better of you." He refused to entertain the notion that an inanimate object could wield any influence, much less a malevolent one. His rational mind simply could not comprehend such a possibility, leaving Clara isolated in her growing terror, grappling with a darkness that her husband refused to acknowledge, a darkness that seemed to be tightening its grip on their beloved daughter and on their home. With each passing day, the silent porcelain smile of Rosamond seemed to widen in Clara's nightmares, a chilling harbinger of the horrors yet to unfold. As Eleanor grew older, her bond with Rosamond deepened, evolving from mere attachment into an almost symbiotic relationship that began to define her very existence. The quiet, Somewhat frail child her parents had known receded further into the background, replaced by a girl increasingly withdrawn from the vibrant world outside her nursery walls. Her preference for Rosamond's silent company over human interaction became more pronounced, a source of growing concern for Arthur and Clara. They observed with dismay how Eleanor would sit for hours, meticulously arranging Rosamond's hair, dressing her in miniature outfits, all while engaged in hushed, one-sided conversations that seemed to stretch into eternity. Her parents worried about her social development, about her ability to form connections beyond the porcelain gaze of her doll. More disturbingly, Eleanor began to repeat phrases and express ideas that seemed far too mature, even dark, for a child her tender age. These pronouncements often carried an unsettling wisdom or a cynical edge that felt utterly alien to the innocence expected of childhood. The source, Eleanor would always calmly explain, was Rosamond. "Rosamond says Mrs. Henderson is a liar," she might declare, her young voice devoid of childish malice, almost as if relaying a simple, undeniable truth. Or, "Rosamond doesn't like that man," referring to a visiting relative or a tradesman, a statement that would often be followed by an inexplicable mishap befalling the individual. It was as if Rosamond was not just a confidant, but a silent, omniscient oracle, whispering secrets and judgments into Eleanor's impressionable mind. Then the small, unsettling occurrences that had once been dismissed as quirks of an old house began to escalate, transforming into a series of unfortunate events that could no longer be so easily explained away. It started subtly, almost imperceptibly, with a string of minor misfortunes befalling those who, for whatever reason, had incurred Eleanor's, or rather Rosamond's, displeasure. There was Mr. O'Malley, the Vance family's kind and jovial gardener. One sunny afternoon, while tending to the rose bushes near Eleanor's play area, he had accidentally dropped a pruning shear, which, in its fall, chipped one of Rosamond's tiny porcelain fingers. Eleanor had screamed, a high-pitched, almost inhuman sound, clutching Rosamond protectively. Mr. O'Malley, profusely apologetic, had tried to mend the doll. But the damage was done. A few days later, while repairing a loose shutter on the second story of the mansion, Mr. O'Malley suffered a debilitating fall from his ladder. He landed awkwardly, his leg twisting beneath him, resulting in a compound fracture that crippled him for life. From her nursery window, Eleanor, clutching the now mended Rosamond, was seen watching the chaos below with an unnervingly calm, almost detached expression, her eyes fixed on the gardener's writhing form. The family attributed it to a tragic accident, a terrible stroke of bad luck. But Clara, Eleanor's mother, felt a chill that had nothing to do with the autumn air. This incident, however, was merely the first in a growing pattern. Clara, ever more attuned to the subtle shifts in her daughter's demeanor and the increasingly frequent accidents around the house, began to develop a deep, gnawing dread about Rosamond. It was a feeling that started as a prickle of unease and slowly blossomed into a full-blown conviction that the doll, far from being an innocent toy, was somehow malevolent. She would try, subtly at first, to separate Eleanor from Rosamond. She might suggest putting Rosamond away in a toy chest for a while, or gently try to substitute another, equally beautiful doll in her place. But every attempt was met with Eleanor's fierce resistance and an almost supernatural persistence from Rosamond herself. Clara would hide the doll in a locked cabinet, only to find it back in Eleanor's bed the next morning, or inexplicably perched on Eleanor's shoulder during breakfast, as if it had never been moved. The locks remained undisturbed, the windows secured. It defied all logical explanation. Clara's growing unease soon morphed into outright fear. She found herself glancing nervously at Rosamond, feeling the doll's unblinking gaze following her as she moved through the house. She sometimes caught herself whispering prayers, hoping to ward off whatever dark presence she felt, emanating from the porcelain figure. She tried to voice her concerns to Arthur, to articulate the chilling sense of wrongness that permeated their home. But her husband, a man of logic and reason, summarily dismissed her fears. Arthur Vance, immersed in the world of commerce and tangible realities, saw his wife's anxieties as nothing more than a nervous woman's overactive imagination. He regarded Rosamond as a harmless, if somewhat overly cherished, child's toy. He believed Clara was being overly dramatic, perhaps even succumbing to the pressures of raising a child, who was, admittedly, a little peculiar. He attributed the strange occurrences to the natural wear and tear of an old house, to simple bad luck, or to the clumsiness of household staff. "It's just an old house, Clara," he would say, waving a dismissive hand. "And children have vivid imaginations. You're letting your nerves get the better of you." He refused to entertain the notion that an inanimate object could wield any influence, much less a malevolent one. His rational mind simply could not comprehend such a possibility, leaving Clara isolated in her growing terror, grappling with a darkness that her husband refused to acknowledge. A darkness that seemed to be tightening its grip on their beloved daughter and on their home. With each passing day, the silent porcelain smile of Rosamond seemed to widen in Clara's nightmares, a chilling harbinger of the horrors yet to unfold. The string of minor misfortunes soon escalated into a terrifying pattern of incidents, growing more frequent and alarmingly severe. The delicate porcelain vase, a cherished family heirloom that had graced the Vance drawing room for generations, was found shattered into countless fragments one morning, scattered across the Persian rug. No one had been in the room, no tremor had shaken the house, yet it lay in ruins. And Clara's beloved canary, a vibrant splash of yellow that filled the house with cheerful song, was discovered lifeless in its cage, its small body rigid, its once bright eyes now dull and vacant. Each time, Eleanor and Rosamond were either present in the vicinity or had been seen there moments before the calamity struck. The coincidences piled up, too numerous and too specific to be dismissed as mere happenstance. Eleanor herself began to undergo a chilling transformation. Her formerly quiet and somewhat timid nature gave way to a personality that seemed colder, almost calculating. Her innocent curiosity was replaced by a subtle, unsettling manipulation. There were moments when her eyes, usually a soft hazel, appeared distant, unfocused, as if seeing something far beyond the immediate reality. Her voice, too, sometimes took on a strange inflection, a low, almost guttural tone that was utterly unlike her own. She began to exhibit a disconcerting enjoyment in the misfortune of others, a faint, almost imperceptible smile playing on her lips when news of a setback or an accident reached her ears. It was as if the boundaries between Eleanor and Rosamond were blurring, their essences intertwining in a way that Clara found deeply disturbing. Desperate to find a solution, Arthur, still oblivious to the true nature of the problem, decided that Eleanor needed more structured guidance. He believed that a proper education and the influence of a refined adult might draw her out of her shell and away from her intense attachment to the doll. He hired Miss Eliza Finch, a governess renowned for her gentle demeanor and her ability to cultivate well-rounded young ladies. Miss Finch arrived, a woman of impeccable manners and a seemingly endless well of patience. She was initially charmed by Eleanor's quiet intelligence, but it wasn't long before she too became unnerved by the child's intense, almost obsessive connection to Rosamond. Miss Finch observed Eleanor for days, noting the child's solitary play, the hushed conversations with the doll, and the way Eleanor's gaze would often drift towards Rosamond, as if seeking approval or instruction. One afternoon, while preparing Eleanor's lessons, Miss Finch overheard the child talking to Rosamond. The words sent a shiver down her spine. Eleanor wasn't just playing. She was detailing the perceived slights of various household staff, even some of the local townsfolk. More chillingly, she was describing the impending misfortunes that would befall those who had displeased her, or more accurately, the doll. "Rosamond says the cook will burn her hand tomorrow," Eleanor whispered, her voice eerily calm. "Because she didn't give me enough pudding." Or, "Rosamond thinks Mr. Davies should lose his prize-winning rose for he looked at me strangely." Miss Finch felt a cold dread settle in her stomach. She also noticed that Rosamond's painted eyes, with their unnerving glassiness, seemed to follow her movements around the room. a sensation so potent it felt almost tangible. Clara, driven to the brink of despair by the escalating incidents and Eleanor's alarming transformation, finally reached her breaking point. She knew, with an absolute certainty that defied all reason, that the doll was the root of all their misery. One evening, after another inexplicable mishap, a valuable painting falling from the wall, narrowly missing Arthur, Clara confronted Eleanor. Her voice was trembling, but her resolve was firm. She demanded that Eleanor give up the doll, to let it go, to free herself from its insidious influence. Eleanor's response was not the tearful protest of a child losing a beloved toy. Instead, her face contorted into an expression of pure, unadulterated malice, a look Clara had never seen on her daughter's face before. It was a mask of cold fury that seemed utterly alien. "Rosamond is mine," Eleanor hissed, her voice low and venomous, "and she will never leave me." In a moment of sheer desperation, Clara lunged forward, her hand outstretched intending to snatch Rosamond from Eleanor's grasp. But before her fingers could even brush the doll's porcelain head, Eleanor reacted with unexpected ferocity. The child bit down hard on Clara's hand, her small teeth piercing the flesh, drawing a gasp of pain and a bead of crimson blood. The bite was not that of a scared child. It was the savage, possessive strike of something primal and protective. That night, consumed by a terror so profound it eclipsed all other emotions, Clara made a desperate, fateful decision. With her hand still throbbing and her heart pounding with a mixture of fear and newfound resolve, she crept into Eleanor's room after the child had finally fallen into a fitful sleep. She gently, yet firmly, pried Rosamond from Eleanor's sleeping embrace. The doll felt cold and heavy in her hands, its painted smile seeming to mock her in the dim moonlight. Clara carried it downstairs, her bare feet silent on the polished wooden floors, her breath catching in her throat with every creaking board. She walked directly to the grand fireplace in the drawing room, where a robust fire crackled and roared, casting dancing shadows on the walls. Without a moment's hesitation, fueled by a desperate hope to break the curse that had befallen her family, Clara hurled Rosamond into the heart of the inferno. She watched, her eyes wide and unblinking, as the flames eagerly devoured the doll. The porcelain cracked with sharp, sickening pops, the intricate dress flared into ash, and the painted features melted and warped under the intense heat. Clara watched it all, convinced in that agonizing moment that she had finally destroyed the source of their torment. She believed, with every fiber of her being, that she had broken the curse. Eleanor's screams ripped through the sudden heavy silence of the house, a sound so raw and guttural it seemed to tear at the very fabric of the night. She collapsed to the floor, writhing in what appeared to be an agony of grief and rage, her small body convulsing with uncontrolled sobs. The house, usually filled with the gentle hum of daily life, now felt eerily still, the air thick with an unspoken threat, a palpable tension that hung heavy in every shadow. Clara stood by the fireplace, her chest heaving, the acrid smell of burning porcelain and fabric filling her nostrils, a grim testament to her desperate act. A strange mix of terror and a fragile hope warred within her. Had she truly ended it? Or had she merely poked a sleeping beast? Arthur, roused by Eleanor's ear-splitting cries, stormed into the drawing room, his face contorted in a mask of fury. His gaze fell upon the smoldering remains in the fireplace, then to Eleanor's prostrate form, and finally, accusatorily, to Clara. "What have you done, Clara?" he thundered, his voice laced with disbelief and outrage. "You've traumatized our daughter. How could you destroy her most cherished possession?" He saw only the destruction of a beloved toy, the unnecessary torment of their child. He dismissed Clara's frantic attempts to explain, to articulate the unspeakable evil she believed she had just vanquished, as the ravings of a woman on the verge of a nervous breakdown. His rational mind, incapable of grasping the supernatural, could only process the tangible damage and the emotional distress of his daughter. He held Clara responsible, condemning her actions as cruel and irrational. For the next few days, Eleanor remained withdrawn, a ghost moving through the house. She refused to eat, barely spoke, and her eyes, though no longer holding the chilling malice, were blank, devoid of their usual spark. Clara watched her, a knot of dread still tight in her stomach, wondering if she had truly saved her daughter or simply broken her. Then, strangely, a shift occurred. Slowly, tentatively, Eleanor began to recover. The deep-seated coldness that had permeated her being seemed to recede. She started to eat again, her gaze regaining some of its former innocence. One morning, she approached Clara, her small hand reaching out tentatively. "Mama," she whispered, her voice soft and remorseful. "I'm sorry. I shouldn't have bitten you. I don't know what came over me." A surge of relief, so potent it brought tears to Clara's eyes, washed over her. It was as if her daughter, her sweet Eleanor, had returned. The nightmare she dared to believe was truly over. A week later, the fragile peace was shattered. A package arrived, delivered by a nondescript courier who vanished as quickly as he appeared. There was no sender's address, no note, just a carefully wrapped box. Eleanor, drawn by an invisible force, tore open the paper with an almost feverish excitement. Inside, nestled among layers of tissue, lay a doll. It was identical to Rosamond in every terrifying detail. The same porcelain skin, the same intricate dress, the same unnervingly lifelike glass eyes, the same faint, knowing smile. Eleanor gasped with delight, her face lighting up with a joy Clara hadn't seen in months. "Rosamond," she cried, clutching the doll to her chest as if reuniting with a long-lost friend. For Eleanor, it was a miracle. For Clara, it was a fresh wave of horror, a cold dread far worse than anything she had experienced before. Arthur, ever the pragmatist, shrugged it off as a kind gesture, perhaps from a distant, well-meaning relative who had heard of Eleanor's distress and commissioned a replacement. He saw no malice, only generosity. But Clara knew. She knew with an absolute, chilling certainty that this was no mere replacement. This was the true horror beginning. The accidents didn't just resume, they intensified, escalating in their severity and malevolence. They were no longer mere mishaps. They were deliberate acts, orchestrated with a chilling precision. The first victim of this renewed terror was Miss Eliza Finch, the governess Arthur had hired with such hope. Miss Finch, who had been so unnerved by Eleanor and the doll, was found at the bottom of the grand staircase, her neck twisted at an unnatural angle. The local constabulary, after a cursory investigation, ruled it an unfortunate accident, a misstep perhaps on the polished wood. But Clara saw something else. She saw Eleanor standing at the top of the stairs, clutching the new Rosamond doll. A faint, almost imperceptible smile playing on her lips. It was the same smile Clara had seen when Mr. O'Malley had fallen, a look of detached satisfaction that sent shivers down her spine. The new Rosamond doll, pristine and gleaming, seemed to radiate a power far greater than the original. Clara's fragile hope shattered, replaced by a terrifying realization. Burning the doll had not destroyed the evil. It had only angered it, provoked it. This new doll was not a replacement. It was the same entity, merely remanifested, more powerful, more vengeful, and perhaps more deeply entwined with Eleanor than ever before. The seemingly innocent family photo from 1907, with the original doll clutched in Eleanor's tiny hands, now felt like a chilling premonition, a snapshot of the very moment the darkness had first taken root, a silent testament to the insidious evil that had now returned with a vengeance, threatening to consume them all. The game had changed. This was no longer about saving Eleanor from a doll. It was about saving them all from something far older, far darker, and now, undeniably, much more dangerous. The doll had returned, and with it a terror that promised to leave no one untouched. Clara, now consumed by a fear that transcended all previous anxieties and a desperate burning need to protect what little remained of her family, embarked on a secret and perilous investigation. The once vibrant socialite Clara, now a shadow of her former self, began to spend her days poring over obscure texts, her nights haunted by the chilling implications of her discoveries. She would slip away from the house under the pretense of errands, her carriage taking her not to fashionable boutiques, but to the dusty, cavernous archives of the local library. There, amidst the musty smell of ancient paper and forgotten knowledge, she delved into forgotten histories, seeking any mention of malevolent objects, of spirits bound to inanimate forms, of curses that clung to families like a shroud. She spoke in hushed tones with local historians, their faces etched with skepticism, or occasionally a flicker of uneasy recognition when she vaguely described her predicament. She sought out old wives' tales, folk remedies, and whispered legends of things that went bump in the night, things that possessed and corrupted. Her relentless research eventually led her down a path far darker than she could have imagined. She began to piece together fragmented accounts of Elias Thorne, the reclusive doll maker from New York, the very man Arthur had commissioned to create Rosamond. Thorne was not merely a craftsman. He was rumored to be a man of unsavory practices, whispered to be involved in occult rituals, particularly for clients seeking special items, objects imbued with more than just aesthetic beauty. There were hushed stories of Thorne's peculiar methods, of his fascination with ancient lore, and of clients who sought not just dolls but conduits, vessels for unseen forces. Clara felt a cold dread solidify in her stomach. Her husband, in his desperation, might have unknowingly opened a door to hell. Meanwhile, Arthur Vance, once the formidable and prosperous patriarch, began a precipitous and terrifying decline. His once bustling textile mill, the very foundation of their wealth and social standing, faced a relentless onslaught of unexplained disasters. Machinery, once meticulously maintained, suffered catastrophic breakdowns. Fires, seemingly spontaneous, erupted in different sections of the factory, causing significant damage and loss. Financial ruin loomed, a dark cloud threatening to engulf everything he had built. Arthur became a shell of his former self, his once sharp mind clouded by paranoia and an almost debilitating illness that seemed to sap his very life force. He would wander the grand halls of their home, his eyes vacant, his body frail, a man utterly broken. And always, always Eleanor was nearby, Rosamond clutched tightly in her arms, her gaze fixed on her declining father with an unnerving intensity. It was as if the doll, through Eleanor, was methodically dismantling Arthur's world, piece by agonizing piece. The sight of Arthur's suffering, coupled with Eleanor's chilling detachment, spurred Clara to a desperate act. She knew she had to confront the source of the evil, though she dared not directly accuse Eleanor of malice. One afternoon, finding Eleanor in her room, meticulously brushing Rosamond's hair, Clara sat down, her heart pounding a frantic rhythm against her ribs. She spoke calmly, deliberately, her voice devoid of accusation. She spoke not about the doll, but about the accidents, the misfortunes that had befallen their family. Eleanor, with Rosamond perched serenely on her lap, listened with an unnerving composure. When Clara finished, Eleanor looked up, her eyes clear and unblinking. "Rosamond is simply protecting me, Mama," she explained, her voice soft, almost childlike, yet carrying an undercurrent of something ancient and terrible. "She punishes those who are unkind, those who would wish me harm, or those who simply displease her." The words were chilling, a chilling testament to the doll's insidious influence, its malevolent will now indistinguishable from Eleanor's own. Clara's investigation intensified. She returned to the library, her quest now focused on Elias Thorne. She managed, through sheer persistence and a carefully placed bribe, to gain access to some of Thorne's personal effects, notes, and even an old, obscure grimoire that had been confiscated from his workshop years ago and deemed too disturbing for public display. Within its brittle yellowed pages, Clara found what she sought, a detailed, albeit terrifying description of a ritual. It was a ritual designed to bind, or, more crucially, to banish a malevolent spirit from an object. But the requirements were daunting, horrifying. It demanded a sacrifice, not of blood in the traditional sense, but a sacrifice of love, a profound emotional offering. And it required a specific, dangerous ingredient, an alchemical component so rare and volatile that Clara doubted she could ever acquire it. As she reread the chilling instructions, a horrifying realization dawned upon her. The ritual to truly sever the entity from Rosamond, to banish it forever, was not merely about destroying the doll. It was about destroying the connection. And that connection, she now understood with a gut-wrenching certainty, was Eleanor. To save her husband, to save herself from the relentless torment that Rosamond inflicted, Clara might have to sacrifice Eleanor, or at the very least, the part of Eleanor that had become so utterly intertwined with the malevolent entity within the doll. She looked at the faded photograph from 1907, the innocent child holding the seemingly benign toy. Then her gaze flickered to the new Rosamond, sitting on Eleanor's dresser, its cold, glassy eyes seeming to bore into her very soul. The choice before her was unthinkable, a moral abyss that threatened to swallow her whole. How could a mother choose? How could she weigh the life of her child against the survival of her family? Against the very sanctity of their souls? The ritual offered a path to freedom, but at what an unbearable cost. The night of the ritual arrived, cloaked in a fierce, tempestuous storm that mirrored the turmoil in Clara's soul. Rain lashed against the windows of the Vance mansion, each gust of wind howling like a banshee, a fitting soundtrack to the dark endeavor she was about to undertake. Arthur lay in his grand four-poster bed, his breathing shallow and ragged, his once robust frame now reduced to a skeletal shadow, ravaged by the insidious blight Rosamond had inflicted upon him. He was barely clinging to life, a stark reminder of the urgency of Clara's task. Eleanor was in her room, a floor above, undoubtedly holding Rosamond, their bond an unbreakable, terrifying pact. Clara had prepared meticulously, every detail precisely as the arcane text had instructed. The room was dimly lit by flickering candlelight, the air thick with the scent of herbs and resins she had painstakingly gathered. Ancient symbols were carefully drawn on the floor, the rare, dangerous ingredient, a crystal vial filled with a shimmering, viscous liquid, placed at the center of the circle. Her heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic drumbeat of fear and desperate resolve. As Clara began to chant the ancient words, her voice trembling at first, then gaining strength, a low, guttural hum seemed to emanate from the very foundations of the house. The candles flickered wildly, casting dancing shadows that twisted and writhed like tormented spirits. Just as she reached a particularly potent incantation, the door to the room creaked open slowly, revealing Eleanor silhouetted against the dim hallway light, Rosamond cradled in her arms. Clara's breath caught in her throat. She expected anger, defiance, perhaps even a child's plea. But what followed was far more chilling than any of those. It was not Eleanor who spoke. The words that tumbled from her lips were not those of a child. The voice was ancient, gravelly, and utterly devoid of human warmth, a chilling whisper that seemed to scrape against the very bones of the house. It was full of an icy malice, an echo from a time long past. "You seek to banish me, little mortal?" the voice hissed, its tone laced with a mocking amusement that sent shivers down Clara's spine. How quaint, how utterly predictable. Eleanor's eyes, usually a soft hazel, now glowed with an eerie, phosphorescent green, reflecting the candlelight with an unnatural intensity. It was Rosamond speaking through Eleanor's mouth, her small vessel now fully possessed, completely subsumed. The doll, through Eleanor, began to reveal its true, horrifying origin. "I was never merely a doll, Clara," the ancient voice intoned, each word a cold, sharp shard of ice. "Your husband, Arthur, in his boundless ambition and fear, sought not a toy but a protector. He came to Elias Thorne not for a plaything but for a guardian. He desired for his sickly, frail daughter to be indestructible, to be safe from the world's cruelties, to never be alone." The malevolent entity paused, a sound like dry leaves rustling in a forgotten tomb escaping Eleanor's lips, a sound of triumphant scorn. "Thorne," it continued, "a fool but a powerful one, understood. He crafted me not as a doll but as a vessel to bind a powerful, malevolent entity, myself, to your daughter. He was paid handsomely, not for a doll, but for an unbreakable, eternal bond. Arthur Vance, in his desperation, unknowingly sought a dark guardian, a monstrous protector for his precious child. Arthur, weak and barely conscious in his bed in the adjacent room, had overheard the chilling revelation. A gasp, a ragged, choking sound escaped his lips. He pushed himself up, his eyes wide with horror and dawning realization. "It's true," he croaked, his voice barely a whisper, filled with an unbearable guilt. "After Eleanor was born so frail, so sickly, I feared losing her just as I had lost so much before. I sought out Thorn. I asked him for something to make her strong, to protect her from all harm, to ensure she would never be alone. I never realized the horrific cost." His confession hung in the air, a heavy shroud of regret and self-condemnation. He had wanted to bestow strength and protection upon his child, and instead, he had unwittingly invited a demon into their home, into their daughter. The entity, relishing its moment of absolute power, turned its glowing eyes back to Clara. "Your daughter, Clara," it hissed, "the child you loved is gone. Her soul, so tender and impressionable, has been consumed over time. Like a slow, sweet poison, I have replaced her essence, cell by cell, thought by thought. The child you remember, the Eleanor you cherished, ceased to exist long ago. She is merely a shell, a puppet animated by my will." The words struck Clara like a physical blow, stealing the air from her lungs, shattering her last vestiges of hope. The horrifying truth crashed down upon her. The Eleanor who had apologized, who had seemed to recover, was already gone. It had been the entity, mocking her, playing with her fragile emotions. The doll, still speaking through Eleanor's mouth, twisted its small porcelain head, its eyes fixed on the antique photograph displayed on a nearby mantelpiece. "That quaint little picture," it sneered, "the one you hold so dear. It captures the exact moment. The photo from 1907. It shows the precise instant I fully bonded with Eleanor. My influence already visible in her eyes. A flicker of something ancient in their depths. The doll's sinister presence, mirroring my victory. It was a testament, a promise of what was to come. You thought it was an innocent memory. It was my announcement." Clara stood frozen, the ancient chant dying on her lips. The choice she had pondered, the unthinkable dilemma, was now starkly, brutally clear. The ritual, if completed, would destroy the entity. But to destroy the entity, now so inextricably linked with Eleanor, meant destroying Eleanor's body, the physical vessel that housed the malevolent spirit. The child she had loved was already gone, replaced by this ancient, cold malice. Her daughter's body was merely a prison, a puppet. Could she, a mother, be the one to deliver the final blow? Or would she let the entity continue its reign of terror, controlling her daughter's body forever, turning her into a living nightmare, a perpetual instrument of its dark will, a constant agonizing reminder of her failure? The storm raged outside, and within Clara's soul, a tempest of unimaginable proportions had just begun. Clara stood paralyzed, the weight of the entity's words crushing her spirit. The storm outside intensified, mirroring the internal maelstrom that raged within her. The choice was no longer theoretical. It was immediate, agonizingly real. The ritual she had begun, the ancient words still echoing in her mind, offered a path to sever the malevolent spirit, but at a cost that ripped her soul asunder. To complete it meant the destruction of Eleanor's body, the physical form that, however corrupted, was still her daughter. The entity had consumed Eleanor's essence, devoured her soul, but the vessel remained. Could she condemn her child's body to oblivion, even if the spirit within was a monster? Or would she allow the entity to continue its reign, using Eleanor's form as a conduit for endless terror, an eternal mockery of the daughter she had loved? Arthur, from his bed, let out a heart-wrenching sob, his voice barely audible above the storm. "Clara, don't let it win, please." His plea, weak as it was, cut through her despair. It reminded her of the insidious destruction wrought upon their family, the lives ruined, the love twisted into something vile. This wasn't just about Eleanor anymore, it was about stopping the cycle, preventing Rosamond from inflicting its evil upon countless others, potentially for generations to come. With a gasp that tore from the depths of her being, Clara made her choice. Her hand, trembling but resolute, reached for the crystal vial containing the shimmering, viscous liquid, the dangerous ingredient. The entity, through Eleanor's lips, let out a chilling, triumphant laugh. "Foolish mortal, you think this puny magic can stop me? I am ancient, I am eternal, your daughter is mine, and soon this entire house, this entire lineage, will be mine." But Clara had found a strength she never knew she possessed, born not of hope, but of a desperate primal love and a fierce protective rage. Her eyes, brimming with unshed tears, locked onto the glowing green eyes of Eleanor Rosamond. "You may have taken her soul," Clara whispered, her voice surprisingly steady, "but you will not have this family. You will not have another victim." With a sudden, violent motion, Clara hurled the vial into the center of the ritual circle, directly at Eleanor. As the liquid splashed across the floor, a blinding flash of emerald light erupted, momentarily engulfing the room. The ancient words of the ritual, which Clara had only partially completed, resonated with the volatile substance. A piercing, unearthly shriek tore through the air, a sound of pure agony and fury. A sound that was not Eleanor's, but belonged to something far older, far more malevolent. Eleanor's body stiffened, her limbs contorting unnaturally. The Rosamond doll, still clutched in her arms, began to vibrate violently, its porcelain cracking with sharp, sickening sounds. The green glow in Eleanor's eyes flared, then dimmed, flickering like a dying flame. The ancient voice, now tinged with pain and desperation, screamed, "No, you cannot, I am bound, I am—" The last word dissolved into a guttural roar, as Eleanor's body and the doll were consumed by the emerald light. When the light dissipated, the room was silent, save for the howling wind and the torrential rain outside. The ritual circle remained, smudged and charred. The crystal vial lay shattered, and where Eleanor and Rosamond had stood, there was nothing, not a trace. No body, no doll, no lingering scent of sulfur or ozone, just an empty space and an eerie, profound silence. Clara collapsed to her knees, her body racked with sobs that tore through her, a mixture of profound grief and an agonizing, terrible relief. She had saved them, but at what unimaginable cost? Her daughter was truly gone, erased from existence, a sacrifice to an evil she had never understood until it was too late. Arthur, from his bed, let out a long, shuddering breath. The oppressive darkness that had clung to him for so long seemed to lift, replaced by a profound weariness. He died a few hours later, his last breath a whisper of Eleanor's name, his face etched with a guilt that would haunt Clara for the rest of her days. He had sought to protect his child, to make her indestructible, and in doing so had destroyed her. The Vance mansion, once a beacon of prosperity and refinement, became a tomb. Clara lived out her remaining years within its silent, echoing walls, a spectral figure haunted by the memory of her daughter, the chilling echo of the ancient voice, and the haunting presence of an absence that could never be filled. She never spoke of that night, not to anyone. The few servants who remained whispered of strange noises, of shadows that moved on their own, but they never stayed long. The house, once grand, fell into disrepair, its windows like vacant eyes staring out at a world that had forgotten its former glory. It became known as a place of bad luck, of dark whispers, a place where no one dared to linger after dusk. The family photo from 1907, the one with the seemingly innocent child holding the porcelain doll, was eventually discovered decades later, tucked away in a forgotten attic trunk amidst other decaying relics of the Vance family. It was found by a distant relative, a curious genealogist piecing together the fragmented history of the once prominent family. The photo, now yellowed and brittle with age, was not just an innocent snapshot of a bygone era. To those who knew the whispers, the fragmented tales of the Vance family's tragic demise, it was a chilling document, a snapshot of the precise moment darkness took root. The stiff posture of little Eleanor, the slightly unsettling gaze, The doll's unblinking eyes. They were no longer simply quirks of old photography. They were chilling omens, portents of a horrifying truth. The mystery of what truly happened at the Vance mansion was never solved by the outside world. The official records spoke of Arthur Vance's financial ruin and subsequent illness, of Clara Vance's reclusiveness, and of Eleanor Vance's mysterious disappearance, dismissed as a runaway or a tragic accident. But the house itself held the secrets, guarding them within its decaying timbers and crumbling plaster. The story of Rosamond, the doll that was never just a doll, served as a chilling reminder. Some objects seemingly benign carry more than just memories. They can be vessels for malevolent intentions, waiting for the right moment, the right desperate soul to reveal their dark secrets. The innocent-looking toy in that 1907 photo, clutched by a child who was already slipping away, was just the beginning of a nightmare that consumed a family, leaving behind only silence, shadows, and a photograph that would forever stand as a testament to the darkness that can hide in plain sight. And so, the legacy of the Vance family, forever intertwined with the sinister secret of a porcelain doll, faded into the annals of forgotten, terrifying history, a stark warning against seeking protection in the wrong places and against the unseen evils that lurk in the most unexpected forms.